Hey all, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. One of the most tragic and shocking events in the history of our nation was the assassination of President Abraham Lincoln by John Wilkes Booth in April 1865. The shock waves that spread throughout the country in the wake of the murder was unprecedented. No president had ever before been assassinated and killed. The vigil over his last remaining hours after the shooting, when he was carried from Ford's Theater to the Peterson House, is widely documented, and there are numerous accounts of individuals throughout the country, from very well known folks to common soldiers in the field who shared their grief in letters home. And a nation mourned, much of the nation mourned as a result. Of course, there are pockets of individuals in the northern states. I'm thinking particularly of the Copperhead faction, that movement that wanted to see peace and was ready to end the war on terms that ended in a separation of the Union and Confederate States. Those folks were surely not quite as upset by the murder of the president. Of course, many of the Confederates, not all, but many of the Confederates shared the same feelings as many of those Copperheads, a certain joy or a certain Lincoln, you had it coming. So no one perhaps represents or is representative of those feelings any more than I can think of than Raphael Semmes, the rear admiral who was best known for being the captain of the Alabama, that raider that terrorized parts of the globe, preying on Union shipping on the commercial merchant fleet, starting with whalers in New Bedford and eventually making his way all across various parts of the world until he got to France, where he met his match in the Kearsarge in July of 1864, losing the Alabama, losing some of his crew, and making his way eventually back to the Confederate States after being rescued and put up for a time in England. Back in the US, he saw firsthand, back in the Confederacy, he saw firsthand the devastation that the US Army and Navy had wrought upon the country, the economic losses, the military losses, the unrest in various cities, the wholesale desertions of Confederates and the Army really took a toll on Semmes' psyche. He wrote all about this in his 1869 memoir, Memoirs of Service Afloat is the title of it. And inside that book, he shares many of his views, many of his rationales, much of his thinking about the causes of the war, as well as his experiences with first the Sumter and then the Alabama. Well, he is well known for his role in the Confederate Navy. However, he was in Richmond when the city was evacuated, and Jefferson Davis gave him a temporary rank of brigadier general to command the Navy personnel who were in the city and around the area, altogether about 250 men. Those Navy men, with Semmes at their command, moved from Richmond down to Danville, Virginia, and eventually made their way, escaping Appomattox and making their way up to join Joe Johnston in North Carolina. And it was there in camp that Semmes got the news of Abraham Lincoln's assassination. So I want to read you this passage, which comes from his book, and it'll give you a really good sense of where he stands on the Lincoln development. So here we go. My camp was astounded one morning by the report that Abraham Lincoln, President of the United States, was dead. He had gone to a small theater in the city of Washington on the evening of Good Friday and had been shot by a madman. It seemed like a retribution that he should be cut off in the midst of the hosannas that were being shouted in his ears for all the destruction and ruin he had wrought upon 12 millions of people. Without any warrant for his conduct, he had made a war of rapine and lust against 11 sovereign states whose only provocation had been that they had made an effort to preserve the liberties which had been handed down to them by their fathers. These states had not sought war but peace, and they had found at the hands of Abraham Lincoln destruction. As a Christian, it was my duty to say, Lord, have mercy upon his soul, but the devil will surely take care of his memory. So, Semmes, not mincing any words here, flat out saying how he felt about Lincoln's assassination, and moreover, talking about his opinion, sharing his opinion about his belief that the 11 sovereign states, those 12 millions of people, should be able to go their way and did not seek war, but sought peace to enjoy the way of life that had been handed down to them by the founders of the nation. So I think it's important to share these other viewpoints of the war, of the military, of politics, of the politicians, and all those folks who participated in the war effort. It's easy over time, as history tends to isolate and simplify, when in fact it was quite complex. The level and depth of emotions, the various forces at play, all weighed into decisions that people made for good and for bad. And so I think Semmes's view, which is not widely known necessarily as belonging to Semmes, but what Semmes captured here is a viewpoint that had substantial amount of support among the Southern people and some element of the Northern population. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you again on the next episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail.